Today we come to Good Friday, surely a very important day for us as Christians, and we wouldn't be Christians without the events of Good Friday. And Good Friday, the Passion accounts of the Gospels take up about 1/3, 1/4 on some of the Gospels, but mainly 1/3 of their entire accounts. They spend a lot of time talking about the Passion narrative of Jesus being betrayed, Jesus being arrested, him suffering through trial and scourging, and then to the place in which he's crucified and buried. And I've specifically pointed out that there is an important piece of why we decided to do these videos at 9 a.m. Jesus was crucified at 9 a.m. and then died at 3 p.m. if you translate it into our time. And that's why I wanted to have these videos uploaded at that time. This account of this Passion narrative of Matthew chapter 27 is what I'll be reading from, and I'll skip a certain section, but there will be a lot of reading as we go through Matthew's account of the Passion. Matthew chapter 27, starting in verse 1. When morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And they bound him and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate, the governor. And we'll skip down to verse 11. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus said, "You have said so." But when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?" But he gave him no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to release for the crowd any one prisoner whom they wanted. And they had then a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when they had gathered, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" For he knew that it was out of envy that they had delivered him up. Besides, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him, "Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream." Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. The governor again said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release for you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ?" They all said, "Let him be crucified." And he said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Let him be crucified." So when Pilate saw that he was gaining nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." And all the people answered, "His blood be on us and our children." Then he released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, delivered him to be crucified. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, and they gathered the whole battalion before him. And they stripped him and put a sackcloth robe on him, and twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on his head and put a reed in his hand. And kneeling before him, they mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they spit on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the robe and put his own clothes on him and led him away to crucify him. As they went out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. They compelled this man to carry his cross. And when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull, they offered him wine to drink mixed with gall. But when he tasted it, he would not drink it. And when they had crucified him, they divided his garments among them by casting lots. Then they sat down and kept watch over him there. And over his head they put the charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Then 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on his right and one on the left. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, "You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." So also the chief priests with the scribes and elders mocked him, saying, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God deliver him now, if he desires him. For he said, 'I am the Son of God.'" And the robbers who were crucified with him also reviled him in the same way. Now from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, "Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani?" That is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And some of the bystanders hearing it said, "This man is calling Elijah." One of them at once ran and took a sponge, filled it with sour wine, and put it on a reed and gave it to him to drink. But the others said, "Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to save him." And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. And behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split. The tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. When the centurion and those who were with him, keeping watch over Jesus, saw the earthquake and what took place, they were filled with awe and said, "Truly this was the Son of God." There were also many women there looking on him from a distance who had followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering to him, among whom were Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. The theologian Fleming Rutledge says that it's not only important that we pay attention to the death of Jesus, though that is greatly important, but that we also have to ask the question, why crucifixion? Jesus could have picked any time throughout history to come. The Father could have sent the Son at any time when a human execution was by a different venue, but execution was chosen through and by crucifixion. He could have been stoned, he could have been beheaded, he could have been any number of those things which were common within those provinces. And yet Jesus was crucified like a criminal. Rome constantly would crucify people which they wanted to show and to display as criminals, insurrectionists, traitors, people that you don't want to mess with, people showing that you don't want to mess with Rome, that Rome will do this to you if you go against us. And Jesus suffered and died that way, treated like a criminal. In his book, The Crucified God, Moltmann says that in the crucifixion we see truly the greatest atrocity ever to befall man. We see the most innocent man to ever walk the face of the earth murdered, treated like a criminal. We see Jesus, as the creed says, very God of very God, light of light, begotten, not born. We see Jesus, the God-man, crucified, stripped of everything, and murdered, slaughtered. And for us as Christians, looking back on this side of history, we know what's going on. As we read the passion narratives in the Gospels, we can fully understand and know and be thankful for this, because we can be thankful knowing that that is what is purchasing our atonement, knowing that we have no righteousness in and of ourselves, but it's only by his righteousness that we can attain a right standing before God. And so this had to happen for us to have a right relationship with God, and God very willingly gave up his Son to do this. Yet for their time, they did not understand that. The disciples, which followed Jesus for 3 years, felt as though all of their dreams, all of their hopes, all of their expectations of a Messiah had been dashed to pieces. You see them respond in this way when Jesus, post-resurrection, is following or walking with the disciples on the road to Emmaus. And they said, "We thought that he would be the one who was promised. We thought that he would be Messiah." Meaning that they obviously thought that they were wrong. His disciples had fled. They thought surely that this is a mistake, that Messiah would not be crucified. The Messiah would not die, let alone be crucified in the most excruciating form. And the reason why Jesus probably chose to come in at that time, Galatians says that it was at the appointed time the Son appeared. The reason why is probably because it shows us the atrocity, the grievousness of sin, the gravity of transgression. We see how serious sin really is. Sin, transgression, iniquity, they're not just mistakes. They're not just decisions that we decide to make and then somehow a Band-Aid is put over them. They're transgressions, they're unholy actions that's done against a holy God. As the psalmist says, that against you and you only have I sinned. And how great of a sin that is. And sin is not just individual actions, though it is part of that, but also sin, death, are a power. Paul talks a lot about this in Romans, that it's a power that reigns over us and a power that we are enslaved to. Worst of all, that we are not able to shake ourselves. We are not able to free ourselves from this power by our own power. because we're too far enslaved. It has to come from the graciousness of the Son. And so we get to look at that and be thankful for it. On Good Friday, all days of our life, be thankful that the Son gave up his life, the shepherd laid down his life for the sheep, so that way we could have abundant life. But in their time, they saw this as defeat. His disciples did not think to themselves, wow, this is great. This is the suffering servant, which Isaiah spoke about. This is what we've been looking for. Okay, this is going to happen. Then Jesus is going to be raised. Because if you remember, when the women come back to tell the disciples that Jesus has been raised, they don't believe it. They think they've been spending too much time on the sun, and they're crazy. These are just folk tales, that surely this can't be. They have a really hard time accepting the resurrection. Some people like to focus that, they like to think that the disciples are these very naive people, they're barbarians, and they don't understand modern science, and so they very readily accepted any word of resurrection of their Messiah. But they had a hard time accepting Jesus as being raised. We can poke and make fun of doubting Thomas is saying that he has to touch Jesus before he can really believe it, but they all had a hard time believing it. Even when they had eyewitness accounts, they couldn't believe it until they saw Jesus himself. If you were to see a movie where it ends on a bad note, you would probably give that movie a bad review. If you were to read a book, which they should have a happy ending, but they don't have a happy ending. I'm not talking about it seems as though the enemy kind of wins, or there's a little bit small victory, but the enemy is really defeated. This story, for the disciples, they really see it as defeat. They have been defeated. There is no happy ending for them. They have to go on living life without Messiah, hoping that somewhere down the road, maybe the real one will appear. There was no happy ending for them, at least what they thought in their own generation. But we know, looking back on it now, that this was really truly victory. This may seem like a defeat in the disciples' eyes, that Jesus has been slaughtered, but we know that he will be raised again, and it was in his slaughtering in which he defeated sin, Satan, and the power of death. We see in Revelation Jesus described as the mighty lion of the tribe of Judah, but we also see him described as a lamb that had been slaughtered. The crucifixion, the passion narrative, isn't just for us in this life even. We will throughout all of eternity be praising the Lamb who willingly gave up his life. We'll be forever, everlasting, praising the one who has ransomed many tribes, many tongues, many nations. Let's spend a good deal of time remembering that today on this year of Good Friday.